Hey guys, how's it going? Path of Exile 2 has been out for a couple of weeks now, and after putting in over 100 hours, I wanted to pull together my thoughts on the game. If you enjoy this video, I'm sure you already know how to support the channel, so let's jump straight in. The original Path of Exile is a bit of a ball ache for many. It's an RPG for people that like Excel spreadsheets, or a hell of a lot of punishment. Unfortunately, an over-reliance on third-party tools and information in online wikis meant many new players dropped off quickly. Path of Exile 2, however, has managed to buck this trend with a host of quality of life improvements, much better onboarding, and a new combat system that rewards and better highlights player agency. At its heart, Path of Exile 2 is an action role-playing game. It unashamedly focuses its gameplay loop on killing monsters and bosses who will drop loot, which will in turn improve the player's ability to kill monsters, leading to killing stronger monsters for more powerful loot, and so on. Where grinding a game set themselves apart from the competition is with the sheer amount of depth in this RPG. I'm going to structure this review as if you were playing through the game for the first time, but without spoilers. You might see the odd boss fight here in the footage shown, or in-game areas, but with over 50 bosses now, and that number doubling at or before full release, you aren't going to be running out of content early on. And to note, the game is in early access. The amount of content on offer does put it alongside most complete titles, but we're currently missing half the campaign and half the character classes and their skills. So let's start there. Of the 6 character classes currently available, there is a great deal of class identity here. In combat, playing a warrior with a large two-handed mace feels entirely different to playing as a witch with an army of minions, or as a mercenary with a crossbow. With a focus on well-timed dodge rolls to avoid damage, and using skills in combination with one another for increased efficiency, you're more than just a damage number or single skill. Combat takes some thought and consideration, but to still boil down to deleting screens of enemies while encouraging diverse play through primer and detonator skills. It's worth mentioning that your skills aren't tied to your class like in other ARPGs. Instead, Grinding Gear Games, the developers behind the project, will even give players complete freedom. But in saying that, to avoid new players getting overwhelmed, there is a strong pull towards class fantasy. If you start off with a warrior and want to play into the class idea, you will find a lot of melee related skills tied to your starting weapon, and a relatively clear path on your passive skill tree to spec into armor, making you tankier, or stun duration to help your big hits feel even bigger. If you then choose to divert and look at skills within the occult or elementalist categories, the game will not stop you. This gives new players clear direction while allowing experienced players to mix and match. A fantastic way to balance out that variety of choice without confusing the player base, given we have over 250 skills and 200 support gems. Path of Exile 2 is daunting in that sense, and its sprawling passive skill tree can be intimidating, but a more generous respec system and a search function means that if you take your time, you can carve your own path with relative ease early on, getting more complex as you get later into the game and need to start balancing offensive and defensive needs. I'll say now, not every build will be able to clear all content. Much like the boss fights, this is a process of trial and error. I personally have over 1,000 hours in Path of Exile 1. Every league, I would complete the campaign. Every league, I would get into the endgame, but I wouldn't always complete the pinnacle content. I have over 100 hours in Path of Exile 2 now, and I haven't fought a single pinnacle boss. Yet I'm making this review, because clearing pinnacle content is not necessarily where the game ends, and shouldn't necessarily be your goal. It's an achievement to strive for. These bosses are set as a challenge for players dedicated enough to make it. If your first build isn't good enough to beat those bosses, that's perfectly fine, and in many cases expected. It may sound weird to hear me say you shouldn't expect to beat all the game's content the first time, but it's necessary to create such a rich gameplay experience. And in many ways, it kept me going back to Path of Exile 1 year over year, each time getting closer to that goal. Getting back to the campaign, Path of Exile 2 has continued to find a good sense of progression. With a bit of a rocky start on item balance that since been patched, playing through the entire 6-act campaign felt natural. Moving from area to area, completing quests and hunting bosses shown on the map was smooth. The game world looks absolutely gorgeous, with brighter, vivid landscapes turning into thick jungles or decrepit tombs. There is a strong visual identity to the areas you explore, and each act has its own flair associated with the missions or peoples you meet. With only 3 acts currently available, I never found them to drag. The story is decent but incomplete for the time being. In early access, you play through the 3 acts twice, the first time round, and then on a harder cruel difficulty. Although the general consensus is the second and third acts are harder the first time round, with the game's current balance. I'd say the campaign would take the average player around 40 to 50 hours to complete on a single character. Subsequent character runs generally become easier as you can share gear and currency items in a stash between your characters, and there is complete freedom in player trade. No items are bound to you. If you find a mace and someone wants to buy it from you, they can, but we'll touch more on that in the endgame section, which is where you'll do most of your trading. Looking at combat, killing monsters and bosses feels smooth and buttery, until you get overwhelmed, cornered and die. But overall, your skills have punch. Maces feel like they're crunching the bones of monsters beneath them. A fireball feels like it's setting an enemy alight, letting you stand back watching it burn. Ice skills can freeze enemies in place. Being able to freely combine and test skills keeps gameplay feeling fresh throughout the campaign and greatly encourages you to play through multiple times on different classes. And each playthrough does feel distinct. You'll fight the same bosses and enemies, but with different tactics, it does at times feel like a different game. The Mercenaries' twin stick shooter feel is entirely different to a sorcerer throwing out spells. And when it comes to the boss fights, you are expected to struggle. Bosses will often kill you on your first, second, even third and fourth attempt, similar to the Soulsborne Ring games, and that influence is felt here. This is a skill check and a learning process. Don't be discouraged by death, it's completely normal. Boss design is maybe the best I've seen in an ARPG. Strong and clear telegraphs, peak visual identity from an art and animation standpoint, and a fantastic challenge. When I took damage or died in a boss fight, it felt like, with better planning or more knowledge, the attack could have been dodged. Where Path of Exile 1's bosses were largely a DPS check with some ability to avoid incoming damage, Path of Exile 2 brings this to the next level, allowing an undergeared player to succeed through skill, as well as through improving their build rather than simply needing to meet a damage threshold. But what I appreciated most is that each boss tells a story just by existing in many cases. From the Devourer, which is a large angry carnivorous worm doing worm things, through to some of the end of act bosses I won't spoil here, who you've often got beef with for their nefarious antics. As I finish up this section, I will say that I can't speak enough on the combat. It's a variety in how deep these systems go. A reminder on the 250 skills and 200 support gems, that's a lot of combinations to try, and you're often debating with yourself if you should upgrade a skill for more damage, while weighing up the usefulness of additional utility like increasing how quickly an ability can stun a boss. And with all of this talk of boss killing, let's touch on how you get there. Throughout the entire game, you're upgrading your gear through loot drops, vendors selling items, and crafting. This is where I could see some divides in player opinion. Unlike many ARPGs, Path of Exile doesn't hold your hand here. You don't get green numbers to show an improvement, or red to show it going the other way. You need to look over items and determine whether it's an upgrade yourself. This aids in building player knowledge and specialization in your build, but does slow the game down. And I will say, in comparison to many other ARPGs, I found the loot grind to be on the slower side. I wasn't dropping gear every 10 to 20 minutes, but I personally enjoy this. I wasn't swapping gear out regularly, but I didn't feel like I couldn't upgrade items and improve. I could buy gear, craft gear, or find it, and if I wasn't finding it, looking over my crafting options was always a possibility and generally fruitful. But if I had one criticism, I would say the crafting system is heavily RNG dependent, and that may turn people off engaging with it long term. I loved the system during the campaign when drops felt very impactful and my leveling was faster. After reaching the early mid-end game, I did start to feel like crafting, especially with Exalted Orbs, felt underwhelming, often feeling like pure gambling. You could use 100 Exalted Orbs and gain nothing, or you could save those orbs to shop on the player trade site, and generally get much more value as you're able to shop for exactly what you want. It didn't feel great to me, needing to decide between crafting myself or trading after having so much fun with crafting in the campaign, but this friction is necessary, and while I'm critiquing it, I don't hate it or think it should be massively changed. Crafting is absolutely available for those that enjoy it, and other endgame systems I'll discuss soon, like essences, can help you be more deterministic in this. You can improve your odds, but having a streak of bad luck can feel brutal. To sum it up, I would argue this is a necessary evil to have a full player trade economy. If crafting was more straightforward, it would diminish the value of trade, so I will say I like it overall. But if you really enjoy your crafting mechanics, and you are hoping to be able to selectively craft your items, until you really farm up some of those endgame currencies, you're not going to feel much of that power. But you have that freedom. You can craft, or you can ignore it completely and focus on trade or mix and match. And before I move on to talking about the endgame, I should touch on ascendancies. This I have rewritten for this script as this week's patch significantly improved the Ascendancy experience, which raises a good point. Expect balance changes. Many aspects of the game are undergoing significant testing now that millions of players have jumped into Path of Exile 2. This means they're identifying overpowered skills, overtuned systems, and giving out buffs and nerfs as needed. And that's what happened here. The Ascendancy system was overly challenging due to some bugs and overtuned mechanics, but they have brought that more in line. To ascend in Path of Exile 2, you currently have two options, the Trial of the Sekhmers and the Trial of Chaos. Each is a dungeon style run with their own twists, and if you die, you get kicked out to try again. Your reward for completing these trials at certain difficulty tiers is your Ascendancy. This is a separate passive skill tree specific to your class selection. Each class will ultimately have 3 Ascendancy options, but currently they only have 2. These Ascendancies offer you greater passive buffs through their own skill tree, and you can really set your class apart here. The Witch, for example, can spec into the Infernalist, giving you a host of new passives like the ability to summon a Hellhound, or the ability to transform your mana resource into Infernal Flame, a resource that stacks up when used and harms the player if they go over the cap. Some may fundamentally change how a class functions, while others will provide more passive buffs. In the Trial of the Sekhmers, you get a new resource called Honor. Taking damage reduces this stat, and if you run out of it, you lose the trial. The trial itself gives you boons and debuffs throughout, improving or hindering your chances at finishing the trial. These systems are a lot of fun if you like the roguelike gameplay style. If you aren't a fan of that RNG, then they feel brutal. And before this week's patch, getting your 3rd and 4th Ascendancies felt awful due to poor balance. It's entirely possible to start a run, get unlucky, and have brutal modifiers that will last for the rest of your trial. Other times, it's possible to get insanely good buffs and clean sweep the entire thing. I like this for an endgame system, and in the endgame, both of these do provide significant rewards unique to their trials, but I'm still on the fence about whether I like it gating such an important aspect of player power with so much randomness built in. For the Trial of Chaos as your other option until full release adds a 3rd trial, you will run rooms with each one giving you a new debuff. This could be removing your armor, or placing totems in the arena that shoot elemental effects periodically across the screen. You stack these over time room by room, and by the end, you're dealing with a lot of obstacles while trying to kill monsters and complete objectives, like escorting a statue or gathering items to be able to progress to the bosses. They are designed to be challenging. This system of ascending further diversifies builds, meaning you and a friend could play the same character with the same base idea in mind, and find yourselves with wildly different setups in the endgame. So let's touch on that. After completing Path of Exile's campaign, you're thrust into its atlas, a never-ending landscape of maps and sparse points of interest spread across it. Progression through the various maps and towers making up these nodes is decently thought out in design. It's satisfying to see how you path across the map, seeing each node light up green as you complete it. I think the visual style here is quite strong. It's clear, to the point, and visually pleasing. The endgame gameplay systems mirror those you're familiar with in the campaign, but without the same mission structure, instead tasking you with completing higher and higher difficulty tier maps through its Waystone system. The systems here really let you tailor how you play. A skilled PoE player will be able to start juicing their maps, giving them higher difficulty but higher rewards, while someone new to the system will have the freedom to experiment and find their footing. Path of Exile 2's endgame also introduces some old favourites from the original, bringing over gameplay functions that add variety to the maps you run, like breaches. Opening a breach will spawn tons of enemies with opportunity for loot specific to this mechanic. There are also 3 other mechanics included at play here, all with their own passive trees to progress, again increasing difficulty and reward. Essences, which I touched on earlier, can be found in the campaign, but also the endgame. These can allow you to get a special crafting material from enemies that give you more deterministic options, like letting you reforge a normal item into a magic item, but guaranteeing a health modifier or some other sort. Each of these also have their own pinnacle boss fights, and the Atlas itself also has a pinnacle boss for players to track down. Each of these tasks feed into endgame crafting, giving you more deterministic options. Delirium, on the other hand, can also be used to upgrade your amulets with significant power. But all of this will take a significant amount of time to farm alone. In the endgame, your leveling is much slower. As you reach higher levels, the amount of XP needed to progress to the next increases exponentially. This harps back to what I said earlier about crafting. Trade in the endgame is your best friend if you want to use it. The trade website is external, but links directly into the game. Browse the website, Find an item you want, and if you have the correct amount of currency, you can send a message direct from the trade through to the game and link up with that player. This allows Path of Exile 2 to have some incredible endgame power, and again, gives you freedom to choose your own path. Knuckle down, run through maps. Save your currency and buy gear. Knuckle down, run maps and find your gear. Or knuckle down and start crafting it with the currency you find. Whether you like all of these styles combined, or one in particular, the choice is yours. Progressing through these systems will then begin netting you passive points to put into your Atlas passive tree. I know, it's another passive tree. Further augmenting how aspects of the endgame work, tailored to your experience. I really can't stress enough how much variety there is here, but it all loops back to killing monsters. That endgame grind is still being balanced. I've heard from seasoned players who've got further than I have, that at the end of the endgame, you can get stuck in certain loops with towers on the map being used to add modifiers to the nodes around them. It can take veteran players more time to set up their juiced maps when compared to Path of Exile 1. But for you listening, dear viewer, if none of that made sense to you, you don't need to worry about it. A lot of complaints I've seen about Path of Exile 2 come from players who are so dedicated to the grind that their goal is to blast through the content. If you're one of those players, you already know what you're looking for. If you are new to Path of Exile as a series, then by the time you arrive at that stage, likely a couple or few hundred hours in, the endgame balance will have likely changed, and if it hasn't by that point, your value for money is there. So I'll end this review on a discussion about monetization and my final thoughts. Path of Exile 2 is currently $30 US, and with that also comes 300 points for their microtransactions store. A tip, by the way, use that currency to buy stash tabs. If you can wait for a sale, I'd recommend it. They happen regularly enough. You don't need stash tabs, but in the endgame, a currency stash tab is a lifesaver. Also to note, the game will be free on full release. That should be around 12 months from now. Their aim is to release in 2025, but with the delays we saw on the lead up to release, I'd take that on notice. So let's break it down. $30 for a 50-hour campaign with 50 unique bosses. $30 for a game with 6 fully fleshed out characters spanning 250 unique skills with 200 unique skill gems and more to come, all with their own smaller ascendancy passive trees. $30 for a sprawling endgame with arguably hundreds of hours of content, if not more. And based on their history, $30 to play now and then experience years and years of free support. New leagues multiple times a year that will bring in the occasional new skills, new mechanics for the campaign and endgame, and fresh start player economies to join. Honestly, I don't think I need to say more there. From a value perspective, Grinding Games give you multiple times more than any other developer in this space for the price. Their microtransactions offer no pay-to-win items. You could, at a stretch, argue that there is pay for convenience with the stash tabs, as they do make organizations simpler, but nothing you buy in the shop will help your build get an edge on anyone else. And honestly, those 300 points you get will likely cover the stash tabs you benefit from in the endgame. And for context, you really do only need them in the endgame, so if you do pick up Path of Exile 2, have a good time with it, and you'll know when those tabs are needed. Ultimately, I consider Path of Exile 2 to be a masterpiece that is awaiting its final touches. I can't see a world in which this game is anything but the new baseline for future ARPGs. We've already seen the comparisons to Diablo, an inevitable discussion considering the pedigree of the series, but ultimately, the amount of content, the ability to pick it up and play with greater understanding, the commitment to a player-driven economy, and 6 more classes to come, and finally, where they set themselves apart, Grinding Games clearly have respect for their audience. They didn't need to go this hard. Are they perfect as a company? No one is. But we have a developer here with a clear recent history of support for their original title, which will continue as it has for decades. I have no doubts Path of Exile 2 will be the ARPG to play for years to come, and sadly, no other large studios have the balls to really challenge them. They're a little too busy trying to get you to pay $70 for their base game, and will make sure to charge you again for the expansion. I think I'll enjoy the larger roster in Path of Exile 2 that's available today, and maybe, just maybe, I'll have had time to try out all 250 skills before the next 6 classes drop. Thanks for checking out this video. I'm going to go dive back into some more Path of Exile 2, and you'll find me there for the foreseeable future. If you have any questions, need some advice, or just want to come hang out and chill, I stream right here on YouTube and Twitch every Tuesday and Thursday, 4 PM Australian Western Standard Time. If you like the video, hit the button. If you want to see more, sub to the channel. But you being here, that's all that really matters. Thanks for watching. Best of luck in Ray class, and I'll see you down in the comments. Cheers.